Doesn't everyone already know how to communicate in the workplace?
Well, I do believe that everybody thinks they know what there is to know about communicating. But we do know a lot of basics about communicating, but we fail to execute oftentimes, even if we know the techniques or we know what the right thing to do is in the heat of the moment or in a conversation, or particularly an emotionally charged conversation like a performance review, a job interview, things where we're kind of heightened, maybe stressed. We tend to forget and we don't execute what we know. We can all improve, and no matter where we lie on that spectrum of skills, whether we're just learning or we're seasoned speaker, there's always better skills to learn, but also executing the ones we know. When the behaviors are studied for research purposes, they are able to quantify. And it's really important that we quantify the results of behaviors that we're recommending so that people know this is not just a feel-good technique. This is not just a recommendation or advice someone's giving. This is backed by science. It's evidence-based.
Welcome to the podcast. My name is Luke Bunder, and in this podcast I have a fantastic discussion with author, executive coach, and founder of System Strategies, Gina M. Formerly a software developer and a healthcare strategist, Gina now coaches healthcare professionals and tech industry leaders using evidence-based practices to foster peak performance, well-being, and success. She also coaches college students and others embarking on life transitions. Gina draws from her graduate studies and research in cognitive psychology, her experience consulting for healthcare systems nationwide, and her belief in the power of behavior to transform us into agents for our own success and well-being. She has published 2 nonfiction books, Skills That Build, that's this book here, and this is The Hard Science of Soft Skills for Work and Life. She's published another book called Fearless First Year, a student guide for college transitions, success, and well-being. And her latest book, Silicon Valley East, this is a fiction book that spotlights themes of imposter syndrome, women in tech, meaningful work, and entrepreneurship. If you want to learn more about Gina and how to work with Gina, you can go to her website, www.ginamwilson.com, or her website, systemstrategiesconsulting.com. You can also find her on LinkedIn, Instagram, and you can find her books on Amazon and pretty much from any major book retailer. This is the first in a series of interviews we're going to do with Gina. And today's conversation is on upping your communication game. I hope you enjoy. First of all, why do we need to improve our communication? Like, doesn't everyone already know how to communicate in the workplace?
Well, I do believe that everybody thinks they know what there is to know about communicating. But I guess really what we're talking about here is spoken communication, right? So there's all types of communication. We're not really getting into the written word of this on this podcast. But essentially, we all think we know, and we do know a lot of basics about communicating, but we fail to execute oftentimes, even if we know the techniques or we know what the right thing to do is in the heat of the moment or in a conversation, or particularly an emotionally charged conversation like a performance review or a job interview, things where we're kind of heightened awareness and also maybe stressed. We tend to forget and we don't execute what we know. So we can all improve, and no matter where we lie on that spectrum of skills, whether we're just learning or we're seasoned speaker, let's say, there's always better skills to learn, but also executing the ones we know. And so I think that's kind of the kicker here is knowing and executing on a consistent basis.
Mm, yeah, because knowing one thing but executing and even executing consistently is one thing, but then being able to execute under stress and
Mhm.
pressure and when we're emotional is a total different level of experience, isn't it?
Right. And I think that if we think about a toddler who's just, they're learning to speak, they have all the mechanics, they can make all the sounds. But they first start out, kind of demanding, really, right? And they, making commands and screaming what they want and things like that. But they get better, right? They get more vocabulary, they learn sentence structure, they get more effective at communicating. And we too can get more effective, even no matter how seasoned we are. And we can also benefit, our well-being will benefit from being more effective in our communication. We'll be better able to connect with people, which we know is has health benefits, mental and physical health benefits. So yeah, it's important. And it's important to refresh, right? It's not a once and done thing. You're like, oh, I went to a communications class 15 years ago when I started working. Well, maybe it's time for a refresher. And that's why we're doing it today, right? This upping our game idea. I think we can all up our game a little bit.
For sure. Yeah, it's really a never-ending level of mastery we can get from that, right? Now, you mentioned the health impact on health communication can have in your
Mhm.
book, and I'm curious, like, can you explain that a bit deeper?
Sure. Well, there's a couple things. We have mental health benefits and we have physical health benefits. And what's interesting is now we have better technology to measure improvements in behaviors. So we can measure, let's say, hormonal levels, particularly oxytocin. It's a bonding hormone, right? We think of it typically in terms of childbirth, but it's not just during childbirth. It's when two people are communicating, they can bond together, and those levels of oxytocin can rise if you're communicating and you're connecting well. And this is men and women, by the way. Oxytocin sometimes is thought as a woman's hormone, but it's really not true. It's in both males and females. So we can all benefit from a better connection. So we can measure hormonal levels. We can measure cortisol, which is stress, the stress hormone. So, if you have a poor communications, an argument or conflict of some sort, that can be measured in the lab. We don't do this necessarily, in everyday situations, but when the behaviors are studied for research purposes, they
Mhm.
are able to quantify. And it's really important that we quantify the results of behaviors that we're recommending so that people know this is not just a feel-good technique. This is not just a recommendation or advice someone's giving. This is backed by science. It's evidence-based. So yeah, measuring the cortisol, measuring the oxytocin, but we can look at things like heart rate,
Mhm.
respiratory rates, things like that. We all know that we might um, talk more quickly when we're nervous or when we're
Mhm.
stressed. We might feel our heart beating, things like that. Well, these can be quantified, and so we know the effects because they can be measured. But from a mental health standpoint, and I find this really interesting, and that is we have tools like the functional MRI that enables us to study the brain and the impacts in the brain of certain behaviors. So we can monitor when someone is communicating what areas light up, how much lights up, what is being activated within our brains. And so what we found is that we can generate more ideas. We can have that big picture thinking. We can brainstorm better, or we tend to be more creative when we've had a positive interaction. So these are reasons that we can justify, if you will, learning to communicate better because they benefit us as individuals. And we also can look at, there are a lot of models in the field of social psychology and leadership psychology that look at meaningful work and purpose and connectivity. And so we find that some of these models, like Seligman's PERMA model, talks about purpose, meaning, relationships, relatedness to other people. So how these benefit our overall well-being and help us be better performers, really, because we're in a better place, let's say, to work at our highest level. So in coaching for performance, I often go back to some basic skills because when we've mastered a few basic skills, then we've enabled ourselves. We're kind of positioned to do our best work. And so it is important, and to recognize these benefits. And communications is one of those that is probably the easiest way to elicit positive emotion, which we know
Hmm.
accrues in the body, and it has compounding effects. So as easy as, a smile or a joke or a conversation that went well, these things restore us, and it actually accumulates in our body to help us towards well-being.
Yeah, fascinating. And that, gosh, I got so many questions from that because, yeah, it really makes sense. If you're unable to get along with others, if you're unable to have a healthy conflict or manage situations, uphold boundaries, really, it's a disability in a way, especially in a workplace where it's communication is a necessity. So, what are some of the have you got any like specific examples where in maybe some people you've coached who were experiencing that negative health impact from in the workplace and they made some adjustments to their communication skills and it made a significant impact on their lives? Any specific tools or examples that you've
Well, I did have a customer or client who really was struggling with um, what I call the high profile communications at work. Things
Okay.
like, salary negotiations, performance reviews, um, asking for the types of projects that were going to allow him to get promoted, right? So if we're not working on certain things, sometimes we're not positioned for the next step, for the next level. So, this guy was, very competent engineer, really kind of froze up in those situations. So what we did a lot of role playing, frankly. And this goes back to that whole executing idea. Like, he knew in his mind what he needed to be doing, but it was the opportunity to continue to practice those skills and to hone in on specific techniques. So one thing we emphasized in our sessions were the one most significant change he made was using a pause. Okay, so pausing in the midst of a conversation when after he said something or after he heard something, from his boss or whoever he was talking to. The pause enabled him to, first of all, take a deep breath, um, which breathing really is very beneficial in kind of slowing down the pace of a conversation. But what it did was it allowed him to gather his thoughts, choose his words carefully in a more forward thinking, a forward focused direction as opposed to reactive. So that helped him really craft his message and what he wanted to say. So we practiced and practiced and practiced a lot of role playing, and
Mm.
he got more comfortable. It seems awkward at first to introduce a pause. Even if you're speaking, when you pause, people tend to fill in the non-words like or right? I do it all the time myself, because
Yeah.
again, I know the techniques, but again, it's executing consistently, right? So you're trying not to fill in those non-words and use the pause to breathe, to think about your word choice, to reframe what you're going to say, or to digest what's being said to you, and enable you to like process it before you immediately come back to response. So that worked for this engineer. He felt a lot better about these conversations, which is really a good indicator, right? If you've communicated effectively, you can feel it. It's uplifting, really, and
Mhm.
it's empowering. And so we have that non non-tangible feeling, I'd say, of satisfaction, but that is a benefit because then you can relax and you can more effectively get your message across.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, I guess the human condition is we always know a lot more than we can actually do. Um, so the knowing is very different from being able to execute, like you said. And
Mhm. The
so,
delivery, the
yeah,
delivery is key.
yeah, because we we probably all know a lot of communication skills, but do you know how to actually deliver it in real time? A mentor of mine, Jason Schneider from Perception Academy, he talks about the idea of practicing within rings of risk. And
Mm,
so he talks about the idea of, so this guy sounds like he was practicing challenging conversations
mhm,
with you in a low risk environment, which is
mhm,
like maybe a first ring, and then maybe taking it out into a little bit of a higher risk to put that into practice then before he then takes it out to the boardroom or bringing it to his boss and having that
mhm.
conversation in the highest risk um, sort of yeah, the highest risk possible. So is that what how do you think about that when you're teaching someone to, they're practicing these skills with you? Do they just immediately go and put it into practice at in the workplace with their boss, or would you recommend, um, like slowly progressing into that?
It's definitely a progression, and frankly, even the conversations with me are not the first step. They do this on their own, right? So they and oftentimes they will. I'll suggest they write out what they want to say or the points. You know, we all know that. You know, like kind of prepare for whatever interaction you're coming up for. We
Yeah.
do that at work. We don't necessarily do that in our relationships at home or with our friendships, but maybe we should, right? Anyway, so practicing writing it out, practicing it on, yeah, on their own through recording themselves, doing a video of themselves. People find that very illuminating and very uncomfortable, right? And even
Mm,
though we're in the midst of Zooms these days, a lot of people are still uncomfortable with being seen on camera, being recorded, all of that. But so we try to get them to a level of comfort with just their eyes or their ears seeing or hearing this, right? So they have that comfort level before they progress to me or to the workplace. But it is gradual, and your point is well taken. You don't want to go right into that important conversation uh, kind of green, you know. So it'd be
yeah.
best to really do it on some other conversations that are less risky or
Mm,
less emotionally charged. So
mm,
absolutely practice, practice, practice. And honestly, these techniques, a lot of them require you want to develop the habit to fall back on those techniques rather than falling back on some undesirable behaviors you may have been using in the past. So it takes a
mm,
while to do that. I've, you know, we're pretty much on the idea that you have to be doing something for three to 4 weeks before it really starts even to become second nature and become the beginnings of a habit. So it's not overnight, and that's why coaching, as you know, takes a while. It's not overnight,
yeah.
and to not jump into the most important, crucial meeting where you need to exhibit these behaviors. So people, a lot of times, I'll get clients who are preparing for their next level. So
Mhm.
they have time for the next review they want to do X, Y, and Z, and so they have time, and so we work towards that incrementally, one behavior at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I've worked with a lot of clients, and it seems to be pretty pervasive across high performers in general, athletes, but especially in the corporate world, leadership, executives. How does perfectionism, needing to be perfect, play a role in messing up people's communications, would you say?
Well, I think perfectionism really is more detrimental to the person experiencing perfectionism than to others, on the outside. So we put those burdens on ourselves when we tend to shoot for the best. But I do talk about this in the book about knowing when is enough versus what's sufficient versus um, overkill, let's say. So
Mm,
you don't, you're writing a report that it's not really going out to customers, let's say, it's going to your team. They're going to be more forgiving perhaps than if it is customer material, right? So, there you could, if you had obviously you don't want spelling errors and things like that. And there's no need for that these days. We have tools to prevent it. But if
Yeah.
something could have been said differently, that's the time where you can do it. And rather than spend the extra however many hours just putting those perfect touches on a piece may not be worth your while, right? And so that kind of gets into the priorities, and when sufficient is enough for that job at that time, as opposed to perfection. And with communications, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to have reached a level of mastery where you're perfect. Even the most seasoned speakers, they'll tell you, I was nervous, or I had to prepare, or I was sweating. Everyone has these doubts, right? It's just what we do with them and how we act on them, or how we mitigate those.
Yeah. Yeah. I know personally, I used to have a pretty negative relationship with embarrassment. And the just fear of becoming embarrassed, like I wanted to avoid embarrassment at all costs. And so speaking, I didn't have permission to feel embarrassed. And so if it came up to speaking, I would just like, oh, it was just this sh shock. But then once I really just put in the time to just thinking about like embarrassment is just a human emotion, and
Hmm.
giving myself permission to just feel that emotion. It's not comfortable, but it's just
Hmm.
emotion. And
Hmm.
just giving myself permission to be embarrassed and go out there and then start practicing and be a little bit embarrassed and be like, all right, that's all right. It's just an emotion. It slowly just disappeared after a while, you know. And that was a really, yeah, that was really interesting. Just avoiding the emotion exacerbated it, really made the
Exactly.
problem worse, you know.
I love that. I love that story. I have a funny story too about embarrassment in communications. And this is early in my career. I was going to a class on presentation skills, and it was a great class, and I got a lot out of it. But while I felt comfortable speaking to the group, uh, what the feedback, first of all, being vulnerable to feedback is really, that's the first time maybe that you can really um, experience that embarrassment of, depending on people, how people deliver the feedback. But
Yeah.
one of the feedback items I got was, I had a pen in my hand when I was speaking,
Okay.
and so the um, the audience, if you will, said that they were distracted because I had this pen in my hand, and I'm Italian. I talk with my hands a lot, so I'm waving my hands around. I have this pen, and they're all like thinking, "Oh, you're gonna drop the pen. You're gonna write on your jacket or something." So I found that it wasn't even about what I was saying or how I delivered the speech. It was about the body language that was involved.
Wow.
So I found that very interesting. But I was embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, I never even thought I had a pen in my hand. I wasn't even aware that I had a pen in my hand. So, creating that awareness, of course, is important in improving your skills. So I never put a pen in my hand when I speak now.
Yeah. And that's there's a great presupposition in I think it's from NLP that says there's no such thing as failure, only feedback of
Hmm.
information. And
Hmm.
so you took that information and applied it, so you never you never speak with a pen in your head anymore. So you mentioned feeling or having I forget the exact words you said, but you mentioned how you deal with feedback, I think. So I know some
Hmm.
people are very insecure about feedback they get, which again, I think if we avoid, just like embarrassment, if we avoid feedback, then we actually don't open ourselves up for the learnings that come with that feedback, and then
Hmm.
we can stay stuck. So for people who have um, some insecurities around feedback, and have you dealt or worked with many people like that?
Feedback does come up often, often from the opposite perspective about giving feedback. And okay, so
Ah,
leaders often
yeah,
have to give feedback, and some people are more uncomfortable giving feedback than
mhm,
receiving feedback, right?
yeah,
Um, but it's, I guess, in both
mhm,
scenarios, it's better to consider where the feedback is coming from, if it's from a mentor or a boss or a coworker or customer. I mean, first of all, if someone is offering you feedback, they are vested in you, because if they weren't, they wouldn't even bother, right, to give you any
Yeah.
feedback. So it's kind of about getting past the emotion of it and taking the
Mhm.
content and dealing with the content. So we try to, in coaching, if someone is struggling with receiving feedback, we work on kind of de-escalating and
Mhm.
looking at it at, from a content standpoint. And maybe the delivery wasn't great in how they got the feedback. And so sometimes people are sidetracked by the delivery. Like, I wish they didn't say it that way. I felt so
Yeah.
horrible, that kind of thing. So yeah, just like, let's boil it down to the actual message and what is usable from that message. Is it a
Yeah.
skill you can improve on, or is it something you can do differently in the future? So then we kind of make it more forward focused, but it's absolutely important. And there's a vulnerability in getting feedback. And even as a writer, opening up your work to others to read, and critique your writing is
Yeah.
so nerve wracking for writers, and I myself included. But it's so great. I mean, it's such a valuable thing to get the feedback, and in the workplace, getting the feedback can make the difference of, what you can do to improve your work, or to improve your options, or your job prospects, or your promotional positions. So it's so
Yeah.
valuable. We have to do it. So let's figure out the best way to do it, right? And how to accept it and how to work with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, there's one fantastic idea that comes from, I learned from neurosemantics. I'm sure it's elsewhere as well, but it's the idea of separating person from their behavior.
Very
And
important.
so when giving feedback, we can say like, "Hey, I really appreciate you as a person, but and you have many great behaviors, and there's one specific behavior I want to talk to you about." And then that just kind of separates it, and because really the problem with feedback is people take it personally and they get bothered by it, right? It's like a personal attack. Um, but if we even think about ourselves as I'm much more than my behavior is just about my skills and abilities, and that person is giving me feedback about my behavior, not me.
Hmm.
I think it's such a good frame to put on to not take things so personal.
Sure.
What do you
And
think
you
about
can
that?
also, think about the negativity bias. And this is where we tend to focus on negative messages that we hear and disregard everything else that might be positive coming across in that same conversation. And it's an
Mm,
evolutionary bias we had in our brains since the beginning of humankind. And it was adaptive in that it helped us be on the lookout for threats in our environment. In the early days of humans, it was wild animals, or, weather conditions, things like that. Now we have social threats, or workplace social threats, where people are getting negative comments from coworkers,
yeah.
peers, bosses, whoever. And what when I work with leaders who are trying to deliver feedback,
Hmm.
they all ask, how do I tell someone, in a performance review, that they really screwed up, right? So, and people do need that feedback. Although I would argue it'd be better to not wait for performance review, but more immediate, so the person maybe
Yeah.
be able to rectify the situation
Mm,
more immediately, as opposed to waiting 3 months till the time of performance review and rehashing old
yeah.
events, right? Um,
Yeah.
but
2 months
it,
ago, you had this terrible
yeah, and the person may not even remember, well, or maybe they do, but it's too much in the past. But
Yeah.
in any case, if you have to deliver or negative feedback, in light of this negativity bias, where we're going to dwell on that negative comment, maybe what we could do is time our delivery such that we start with that, and not phrase it first of all in such a negative, but like, this was the assignment, this is really what we expected, and this is what you delivered, so you can see the gap, right? And the person can make the connect the dots themselves about, oh, I wish I had done that, or I hadn't done enough, or whatever. They see where the problem is. But so you talk about that in a more forward focus, like, well, next time when we're in that situation, ask for help, B, come to me, C, do this other thing instead, so you can talk about corrective action. So it becomes, well, what can you do? So you're empowering the other person to make a change so that next time they don't have that issue. But also then deliver all the great things. Okay. So they're leaving with all the more positive comments, more
Mm,
fresh in their mind, right? So you don't start off with all the great stuff and then say, oh, by the way, you really screwed up on this assignment.
yeah.
No, you really, if you just reverse the timing, you start out with that and then you build. So the negativity bias that the listener has isn't going to obscure whatever good things you have to say. So timing, it can be really crucial in the delivery and the receipt of feedback.
Timing and the delivery. Yeah, that reminds me of was it the 1 minute manager, like feedback sandwich thing?
Mhm.
Similar kind of format, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I like that. Yeah. So,
um,
yeah, sorry.
and being vulnerable, I mean, it's a skill. It is a skill, and
Um,
we're taught to be kind of stoic and so forth. And
mm,
I face this as a woman in the workplace. The tendency to adopt more historically masculine traits. In terms of receiving feedback or in a conversation. It's so we're kind of socially conditioned, if you will, to
hmm
not be vulnerable. But that's where growth happens, right? When you're vulnerable, you can
mm,
then, your human side, your human traits come forward, and that's what makes you you, right? As opposed to just another person on the team. So
hmm
it's important to open yourself up. It does get easier. The more you allow yourself to open up, the easier it is.
So,
And yeah,
yeah. So if someone has a fear of vulnerability, or they're not very skilled at being vulnerable, what are some ways they can just put that into practice, or how can they start practicing that skill and get better at that?
so I like your point about starting with a low risk situation, and that's again where they can start with vulnerability, with a trusted companion, a friend, a family
Partner.
member.
Mm.
Start
Okay.
there, right? And or
And what,
even writing it down for yourself, right? Write what you would want to say.
right, is that what it's about? So that's what I was going to say. What specifically would they be sharing? Is it just like maybe I'm feeling really nervous about this upcoming presentation. Is that authenticity? Or like what are some examples of things they could
Sure.
write down or share?
Or just this is a new situation for me. I've never done this before. I know it's
Okay.
high stakes, right?
Yep.
Let's say you have your new contract is dependent on the success of this presentation, right? So it could make or break your year, if you don't get that contract, that kind of thing. Yeah, so there's a lot that they could voice. I'm nervous, it's new to me, it's high stakes. um, I feel like all eyes are on me, right? But a lot of people are uncomfortable being in the spotlight like that. So those kinds of things, people are vulnerable at all levels within an organization. And it doesn't stop with midline managers.
Mm.
It's all the way up to the C-suite and the board. Um, so yeah, voicing it, naming it gives us a level of control that if we don't name it, if we don't discuss it, it kind of sits in the background. But if it's something named and tangible, we can work with it and move forward.
So what would you say to someone who says, "No, vulnerable is weakness"? I just feel that'd be being, wouldn't that be, I'd be weak if I was like sharing that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I do see that a lot. People don't maybe use the same words, but the sentiment is there very, very often. And so, what I say is, do you want to improve, right? And so what does it mean to you if you open up that part? What what is that going to mean to you? Like, yeah, it might be uncomfortable, but like what ultimately where will it get you? Well, someone might have some really good tips for you that counter your feelings of, inadequacy or what have you. You could, they might actually say something and say, oh, really? And then you feel better about the whole situation, right? Or you do a better delivery of your presentation. So if you start looking at what could come out of it and personalize that, if a person can actually articulate
Mm-hmm.
what it would mean to them and how it will benefit them, then they're going to be more motivated to try it.
Mm. Yeah. Mm. Because the idea, I tend to reframe it to people who feel like it's weakness. In my opinion, it takes a lot of strength to be vulnerable. It takes a lot of
Mm-hmm.
courage
It
to
sure
be
does.
vulnerable. If
Mm-hmm.
anything, the one who avoids it is actually not feel there's something on the line. They're
Mm-hmm.
afraid. So I think the benefit of being so vulnerable is also that it makes you much more relatable. And I think you were alluding to that earlier. Just relatable. You're a human being, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of relatable person is someone that you can connect with and feel like you can come to. I've worked with several leaders who have that kind of bias towards vulnerability, and
Mm-hmm.
people don't people don't tend to want to open up to them and be real with them because they're
Mm-hmm.
not real with everyone else, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's an added benefit of being vulnerable. Was there are
It's an
many.
authenticity, I'd say. There's a lot of emphasis on being your authentic self these days, and rightly so. Like it used to be, and I'm going back a couple decades where people had their work persona and then their other persona, right? And so they never met, right? It was like, a Jekyll Hyde situation in some cases, right? And so now we're seeing people bring themselves more to work, and it's really engaging, particularly for leaders, that yeah, I have a family and I have an interest outside of work. It's really great for their teams to see that they are a real person. They're not just somebody up in the sky, in an ivory tower somewhere. They're real people. And so being vulnerable is another way to show, your human side. And it's very, very powerful in the workplace.
Mhm. So so that's a very powerful thing to do in the workplace. What are some other really powerful things that in skills, communication skills, or specific things that you see as being, or based on your research, some of the other powerful things people can implement?
Well, a lot of my early graduate work was focused on agency and how much control we have of a situation, and there's so much that's not within our control, but there's a lot that is. And so if we can begin to identify what we can change, then we'll be able to affect change where we thought it was maybe kind of nothing, nothing we could do. So, for example, in communications, uh, the idea of speaking assertively is so important, not only in the workplace but elsewhere throughout our lives. And this is something where we can't change what someone thinks of us or what someone does, but we can change how we think of ourselves. So if we are speaking assertively, then we can be in a position where we know, well, we've stated our needs, we've made the request, we invited the other person into our situation and try to promote understanding. It's up to them whether they take it or not, right? But at least we know that we've done that ourselves. So I feel like, whatever we can do in our communications to foster that agency, assertive communication skills is one way to do it. Um, we can become more knowledgeable about language that we choose to use. So we can avoid what I call in the book, Skills That Build. I talk about the poison words, right? And
Mm,
one example would be speaking in generalities and absolutes. Like if you say, they never give me a good project at work, I'm always getting the worst. When you start quantifying with those qualifiers, always, never. It's so it kind of erodes your credibility, first of all, and
Yeah.
it kind of tunnels you. It limits your thinking to in a very negative way. So rather than doing that, how can we rephrase that to say, I wish, or I'd prefer to be on these other projects, or
Mm.
I want to ask to be assigned to something more interesting or something challenging,
Mm.
rather than, uh, across the board, they always give me this, they never give me that. That kind of speaking is a
Mm.
language pattern that directs not only our thinking, but the way others perceive us. So that's another way we can improve our language. And so there's a lot of techniques in the book about positive ways to use your words. Words do matter. So
Yeah.
that's another way to exercise agency. It's very empowering and it's satisfying because even if you don't get the outcome that you were looking for in that conversation, at least you know that you've done what you could do, and all you can do is invite the understanding, and it's up to the other person to really take you up on it and participate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, uh, when it comes to being assertive in the workplace, there, from my experience, I noticed there tends to be a lot of all or nothing thinking that
Mhm,
prevents people from that. They're either
mhm,
passive or aggressive.
mhm,
And I know your book actually has a nice image or
mhm,
visualization in between. Uh,
mhm,
it's passive, aggressive, I think, and then assertive in the middle.
mhm,
So
mhm.
how can people get out of that either or and come to the middle and understand how to really do assertive communication without being overly aggressive and overly passive?
Yeah, I think it is a continuum, right? So, some days we maybe fall more to one side than the other, but you think of assertive, it's neutral, where everybody's being respected. So,
Yep.
not only respecting uh, your needs as a listener, I'm respecting my needs as a speaker. So
Mm.
when you think of it that way, as a mutual respect, it's empowering, and it can make the difference between putting someone on the defensive and opening them up to a possibility. So I think that's important to keep that neutrality. It's important to keep those I statements, like I would like to be on a better project, or I would like a more challenging project, rather than you've never given me something, like, how's that beneficial? It's not forward focused.
Very
So
disempowering and kind of like a victim language.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and this allows us to express our desires, and
Mm.
it doesn't mean the person's going to act on it, but at least they know what you're thinking, what you want, what you're requesting, and they can, and you're inviting them into that, to take action if they can.
Yeah.
So yeah, and
Love
for
that.
aggression, it seems like it's misinterpreted often. If someone is acting assertively, sometimes it's seen as aggressive because we're so used to maybe that same person acting passively or
Totally.
speaking passively. So the minute they start being more assertive, someone might interpret that as aggression, but really they're stating their needs. They're being neutral. But
Mhm.
on the spectrum, it looks more aggressive than it had been, which truly it is. If you've been passive communicator all this time and now all of a sudden you're assertive, it's going to be a change that people will notice.
Yeah. Mm. And so if someone was or has been quite passive and they're deciding I'm going to go in and start being more assertive, how can they overcome that transition, I guess, to get
Hmm.
to get
Hmm.
everyone used to the new them, the new assertive
Yeah.
version?
Well, I think it comes back to that vulnerability that you mentioned earlier, is to actually say, I know in the past I have not done X, but
Mm.
now, I've thought about it, and I'm I'm trying to advocate for myself. No one can blame you for advocating for yourself, right? That's
Yeah.
perfectly reasonable.
So just
So by
communicating
stating
that.
that,
Yeah, communicating. I'm going to try to be more assertive from now on.
sure,
So
yeah.
expect that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Right. So I'm really curious. I wanted to ask you, what do you, based on your research, what are some of the most destructive communication habits you see executives and leaders engage in?
There's a lot of one-way communications at that level.
Mm, okay.
Um, the idea of directives and, kind of laying down the law sort of
Mm,
approaches to
using
communicating with
their
a team.
authority.
Yeah, using authority and not opening up a discussion and not including more of an exchange. So,
Mm,
and this kind of comes along with the idea of executive presence, which I do some coaching for executive presence, where leaders want to have a more generous, let's say, persona in the workplace where they are open to feedback or getting ideas from their teams. And I think you know that's probably a big challenge for a lot of people. They've risen to a certain level. They're used to just like doling out assignments or making decisions, setting the strategy, and maybe not haven't been so open to input from all levels. And it seems to me that leaders and more recently are open to that. And I think maybe it's a new workplace culture or just more education that people have now about what makes a good leader. But I do have requests for that. And so with executive presence, a lot of it is listening skills. They're probably more advanced in the spoken communication skills
mhm.
as a speaker, but maybe not so much as a listener. So we work on the listening skills. The pause is something we use. And the full presence, being present for someone, uh, giving them your full attention, not being rushing out the door or on the phone or working at your computer when someone's talking with you, just stopping all that, eliminating all those distractions and giving them your full attention. So that might mean rescheduling the meeting to a point where you can give them your full attention. If someone comes into the boss's office with a problem, the boss is working on something, maybe they can't give them, but they say, I absolutely want to talk with you. Can we do it? Set a time later in the day or set it up. But that way you're telling them what you have to say is important. I'm interested. I just can't give you my full attention now. So let's do it when I can. And so that invites a level of comfort for the other person to approach the leader, and the leader is being present. So I think that goes a real long way.
Yeah. Yeah, when a leader isn't present, and when someone's talking to them, it really says a lot. Says I don't really respect. And if I was to do that with my wife, it would really get a lot a lot of trouble, right? So
Right. Well,
speak,
and these skills can be used anywhere, not just in the workplace, right? So, like
yeah.
you said, at home or wherever,
Mm-hmm.
you want to value that person and show them that you value them. And so you want to give them your full attention. So the presence is really something we all need to work on, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Now, what about what about I've noticed when leaders and just people in general, a lot of us communicate in abstractions, and you mentioned this
Mm,
earlier. But and I believe you mentioned it in your book. Uh, so transferring from abstractions and learning how to speak in the observable behavior, sensory based
mhm.
communications rather than evaluations and like you've really got to improve your communication. That's pretty. What do you mean by that exactly?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's quite abstract. So, what's your experience with that, and your recommendations around that?
So being specific is what you're alluding to, and that is really it's so important in communications because what you think you're saying and what someone hears could be
Yeah.
completely opposed. Like you have a different idea of communications than I do, let's say. So by being specific, like, I really want you to improve how you are communicating with your team when you're conducting a staff meeting. Okay, that's more tangible. But
That's
what if it was, I really want you to lay out our strategy so that everyone on the team understands. That's even more specific, right? Or
Mhm.
I want you to specifically tell them that we're trying to get 10 new customers in this next quarter. Okay, that's even more specific. So the more you can quantify and put tangible requests out there, people can act on those, right? But
Yeah.
they might be acting on the wrong thing if you're not being specific enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Measurable, sensory, specific language rather than yeah, you really got to improve your performance or yeah. You've been really doing even when it comes to feedback, you've been doing a great job lately. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, what specifically have I been doing that's been a great job that I should keep doing?
I mean, yeah, that's great, but like, what exactly? I get that too with my book. Sometimes people's like, I really enjoyed your book. So my next
Yeah.
question is, what did you like about the book? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, and same with coaching. Like, I always ask for feedback after an engagement has finished, and they have surveys and what have you. But also, I ask for specifics. What worked, what didn't work, and so then that becomes actionable, right? And so when we're specific, someone can act on those, and that's really what we want, right? We want a change of some sort. But when it's nebulous or kind of a generalization, it's really hard to pinpoint, and you don't know what to work on. You might be working on the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in any relationships, whether it's personal, intimate, or relationships with people we're leading, I think everyone has a different understanding of what respect means to them,
Hmm.
or what is disrespect to me might not be disrespectful to you. So
Hmm.
I think if we're leading a team, getting to know our people and what matters to them is such an important piece to
Hmm.
leading a team successfully, right?
Yeah, getting to know the individual is really important, particularly in communications, because I talk about in Skills That Build the need to tailor your message to the audience, right? And so, speakers, people who do public speaking, they're really great at this. They know their audience in advance, they do their research. Am I
Mm.
speaking to, C-suite executives, or am I speaking to, brand new employees who, right out of college, something like that? You might tailor your examples differently. You
Mhm.
might use different language. You might be more or less formal. So tailoring to the audience is really important, but not just in giving a speech, but in interacting with coworkers or teams, even customers. You're going to speak differently to a customer than your coworker.
Mm.
And I used an example where children are taught often to speak to grandma in one way
Mhm.
differently than they would speak to their friends on the playground, right? They're not going to use swear words, and they might use their manners, with grandma, or they speak a little more formally than they would if they're texting their friends. So we too should know who we're speaking with and tailor our message, the way we deliver the message. Maybe we're not changing the message, but we're changing how we deliver it based on what we know of the other person. And this goes for those whole the idea of the multi-generational workforce. People, that has come up a few times now in recent coaching.
Yeah.
We have what, 7 or 8 decades worth of people in the workplace now, from their 20s. Now we have people working well into their 70s. So,
Yeah.
people have learned, over these decades, different styles of speaking, right? So it
Yeah.
really doesn't come down to how old they are. It just comes down to knowing that person
Mhm.
enough to say, this works really well with them. This may be less so. A young person out of college who might be much less formal, or a customer, you're going to use less acronyms because maybe you have to explain more rather than using jargon that you would with your your team and your coworkers. So it's a matter of knowing who you're speaking with and adjusting your style a little
Mm.
bit just to make it more effective for that person.
Mm. So a lot of our communication these days is through text and email. Why this comes up, because I recently read an article on from Science Direct on the power of emojis,
Mm,
using the emojis to influence
mm,
emotional communication, social attributions, and information processing, and just because we probably all had the experience of like a I guess in the workforce, in the workplace, it's direct, just direct texting. Just
mm,
we don't have to make it warm, but some people might really want that or need that extra warmth in their
mhm.
messaging. But what's your understanding or what are your recommendations around text communication, how to communicate better through text and email, that kind of thing?
Mm. Well, what's interesting is I think emojis really are meant to mimic human facial expressions and body language, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, some people use that effectively as they would if you spoke with them in person and they, they clap their hands together or they light up their face. They have a broad smile, so we have emojis that can sort of imitate that, right? And that's kind of the purpose of some of them.
Yeah.
But some people don't appreciate the brevity in a text, and so
Mhm.
again, it comes to understanding your listener, right,
Yeah.
or the other person you're texting. What is their style, right? And we all have those people who text us, and it's like breaks into several texts because it's a long paragraph, and and then we have those that are so curt it's almost like offensive. So
Yeah.
and the same person might be texting differently depending on who they're texting. So
Mm.
it's similar to spoken communications, right? So again, knowing who you're communicating with and trying to manage what works best with that person.
Yeah. So would you, in order to figure out how to manage with that person, would you just recommend asking, hey, how do you prefer me text you? Or would you recommend just matching
Mm.
and kind of matching how the other person texts? If they tend to use a few emojis, maybe if I'm the team leader, maybe with that person, I would use a few back just because maybe that's how they communicate.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the idea of mirroring, like you're saying,
Yeah,
mirroring. We
mirroring.
do that in
Yeah.
conversations as well,
Yeah.
mirroring the style. But maybe, it's kind of, again, getting back to that authenticity. Like,
Just,
I'm not much of a texter, so do you mind if I just pick up the phone and call you? Some
yeah.
people
Yeah.
will do that, just ask, is it better for me? Can I call, or can we just do a quick Zoom, or can
Mm.
we just communicate through text? So asking the preference is always good, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I would still encourage people to try to match, the level of comfort. And if you're not comfortable matching, say, I'm really not good at text. You could tell them, like, I'm using an emoji and I don't even know what it means. I get that sometimes from leaders who are like, they're on an iPhone, I'm on an Android, the emojis don't translate well, so you get into that. So you have to really, again, it's about voicing it, right? Voicing the discomfort, voicing the awkwardness, voicing your preferences. And again, this is all back to assertive communications, right? Sharing where you're coming from and inviting the other person in.
Just being assertive and authentic about just being real with people, real about
Mhm.
what's going on. Yeah. I really like that. And so I think it's not very common to use smileys and emojis, especially in the corporate
Mhm.
emails, right? In the
Oh, you're
emails,
right. Emails, yeah.
I rarely see emojis on emails. It's not a very common thing. So I guess we can
Mhm.
still just use our just our normal writing, right?
And sometimes it's important to know the form of communication, like matching that to the message. Like if you're in some, you just want to communicate some information, like relay information, okay, an email might be fine. But if you're
Mm,
looking for feedback and more of an exchange, an email is probably not the best way because it's not interactive. So maybe then you do have a call or a Zoom or meet in person. Um, so recognizing, fitting the task to the form, to the media is important to know. And I feel like I see college students who are not comfortable using email, and when they first get into the workplace, it's kind of a new thing for them, and maybe depending on their workplace, it might be the way people communicate there. And so there's a bit of um, training that needs to occur, particularly, and employers would be good to recognize that their new hires have a
mm,
style coming in, and maybe they don't know what the culture is in the workplace, that we don't text, or we tend to get on a Zoom before we would send an email. So those kinds of things are good to clear up front as part of the onboarding process. But again, styles, what style works, what are people comfortable with, and maybe there is some training that would need to be done for everyone to kind of start at the same point.
mm, yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so I'm curious about your what was your inspiration for build for writing Skills with Build?
Hmm.
Because was that your first book, Gina?
That was my first book, and
Yeah.
I wrote it in 2020.
Hmm.
I feel like uh, it was kind of evolving because I had been doing a leadership development program called Skills That Build. And that program was more in a corporate environment. I'd have cohorts of, usually 8 to 12 people in a corporate setting going through the Skills That Build training. And this focused on basic, uh, basic behaviors that allow a leader to develop from within. So the whole premise of Skills That Build is first you lead yourself
Mm,
so that you can be a better leader for others. And in leading yourself, there's some skills that we can master that build us. They build us into better leaders. They build us into better people and enable us to work at our full potential. So that's the premise of the program. And I thought, well, I could reach a broader audience if I wrote this into a book. And and in the corporate world, I was seeing, the top performers were being sent to this program.
mm,
Sometimes poor performers, but generally that was more for individual coaching. But so the people in the middle were kind of left out. The people, your average employee, person who maybe was a new hire. There's so many gaps of those that had access to coaching. So I wrote the book thinking this is going to bring coaching, professional coaching, to the average employee who maybe aspires to a leadership position, or someone who just wants to be better at their job or do better in the workplace. So that was why I wrote it. And I picked these 4 elements. I picked spoken communications, empathy, which is a whole discussion on its own,
yep.
resilience, the ability to bounce back after hardships, because we all have failures or hardships in the workplace, and
Mm,
also the idea of values-based prioritization. So how do we work best when we have all these competing demands? So sorting through all that and prioritizing our work and managing our work and our time so that we're doing the right things,
yeah.
and getting the right work done at a level that we want to achieve. So those 4 areas are the parts of Skills That Build, and they're parts of the development program that I offer. I still offer it for
Yeah.
corporate environments, and I also think that everyone can benefit from these in the workplace and outside of the workplace. They're generic skills that could be applied throughout life, and I wanted people to be able to learn the science behind it, because most of the people I coach are looking for results, right? They want to know that they're not wasting their time, that they can measure improvement, that this work is grounded in science. And so that's what I present, evidence-based techniques. but also the coaching exercises that I would do maybe with a client in sessions. So I step the reader through these exercises to practice what they've just read about.
Mm.
So that's really important. And the other part I wanted to include were relevant examples. So I use a lot of workplace scenarios that would be common no matter what field you're in. And so the relevant examples are taken from my client case studies. Of course, no names because we maintain confidentiality, but essentially people can see, oh yeah, I had that similar situation. And so they can relate to what happened in that case, or they can just see how someone else worked through a problem or a challenge.
Mm.
So that was what I wanted to do with the book. I hope I achieved that. Um, I've gotten good feedback on it. And so I think that, it's definitely meeting a need out there, whether you're a new employee, starting your career, or someone who's mid-level, or someone who's aspiring to become a leader at the top levels. I think it's beneficial for all of those levels within an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've done a great job, and yeah, anyone who reads it's gonna benefit a lot from it.
Thank
Where
you.
where can they find that book?
So,
Amazon, right?
Skills That Build is available anywhere that books are sold.
Okay.
Amazon, your local bookshops, Barnes and Noble. It's available on my website, GinaMWilson.com.
Yep.
I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, so I can be found there. But essentially, any place that you can order books, you can order Skills That Build.
Right on. Awesome. Awesome. Well, maybe I think the next episode you and I do is going to be focused on part two of your book, which is empathy, I believe.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to that
Yeah,
conversation.
that's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. All right. Well, that leaves us on a cliffhanger because I'm curious as to why. So let's leave it there. And
Okay.
thanks thanks so much for having this conversation, Gina. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you. You too, Luke.
Thank you. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.